In this video, I'm gonna make French-Canadian pork stew. My goal is to cook something using a streamlined process and off-the-shelf ingredients whenever possible. It shall be the holidays pretty soon, and that means cooking up a wonderful winter tradition. The recipe for this one originally came from a bag of flour. I am not even kidding. My mother copied it, adapted it to her own taste, and then I nabbed it from her recipe binder. In a way, the dish is a mashup between a pork shank stew and a pork meatball stew, thereby giving us the best of both worlds. The recipe takes 2 days to make, and that is chiefly to allow us to make and then degrease a stock that will be used on the second day. Making just the meatball stew with a ready-made or store-bought stock might be possible, but I have no reason to attempt it, as I do want nice tasty chunks of pork shank in the final dish. Now, it is day 1, and here is what I will be using. At least 2 pork shanks. Mine came in a pack of 4. I will use all of them because why not? In my neck of the woods, frozen pork shank is probably one of the cheapest cuts of pork one can get, and they are fairly short compared to, for example, a proper shank one would get to make German food with. Picture for comparison. Depending on where you live, grab whatever is cheap and will give the stock a good taste. If there is meat on whatever you get, that is great, but not an absolute requirement. The meat can be considered a nice bonus for the sake of heterogeneity, although I will hazard a guess that the rind surrounding the shanks will provide some collagen for the stock. A spice mix consisting of 1 teaspoon coarse salt, 1/2 teaspoon ground cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon ground pepper, 1/8 teaspoon ground clove, and 1/8 teaspoon ground nutmeg. The amount remains the same no matter how much pork I use. Consider them as flavoring for the stock, not the meat. 2 onions, which I will chop in whatever manner I feel like that day. Lastly, 4 cups of water, which I will warm up in the crustiest kettle to exist this side of the universe. The shanks I will coat all over in the spice mix. Some of it will stick to the meat even after all the cooking, and give it a good taste. This is a gigantic enameled cast iron pot. It will be my cooking vessel for today. I will throw in whatever cooking fat in there, and today I am in the mood for butter and a little splash of cooking oil. Putting these together will make the butter more forgiving and less prone to burning. Once the cooking fat is nice and hot, I will brown my shanks all over, get some sweet Maillard reaction going on as many surfaces as I can. I will want to keep more oil and butter on the side, because apparently it seems like I never put enough in there on the first go. Groovy. That looks beautiful enough to me. I can throw in the onions, give them a stir, and let them sit for a few moments so they can soften up to get to temperature. Once done, I can add in my 4 cups of water, and since the water is already warm, it will get the stock to a simmering point on the quick. These bad boys can go on cruise control, covered, and I will let them simmer gently for 2 hours. I will check back every 30 minutes or so, and flip them around so that nothing goes bone dry in there. 2 hours later, the pork shanks are fully cooked, and I have a beautiful broth ready for tomorrow. I will take the shanks out and let them cool down for a while. Once they are cool enough, I can debone them and salvage whatever meat I can find. Despite the apparent size of the shanks, most of them really consist of hard bone and gristle. Nonetheless, I managed to get well over a pound of meat out of the process, which is downright amazing to be honest. The meat can go into a Tupperware for the next day. The rind can be discarded. Or I could pop them into the oven and try to make a budget chicharrones out of them, but I am going off topic. Once the pot is cool enough, I will put it in the fridge and get back to it on the next day. Day 2. My first order of business is to prepare a batch of toasted flour. I will keep a large bowl and a fine mesh sieve somewhere nearby, ready to spring into action. Next, I will grab 1 cup of flour, dump it into a cool, dry frying pan, and set the heat to medium. I will then constantly move the flour around, never stopping once. Do not get the phone, do not answer the doorbell. I personally regard that step as the most important one of the recipe. It is where the magic happens. If at any point you believe you have screwed up, start over. The time investment will be well worth it. By the way, let us go through the usual disclaimer, which is that one may be tempted to attempt to toast the flour into the oven. Never do that, as it constitutes a significant fire hazard. It will initially seem as if nothing is happening, but once the browning starts, things will progress very quickly. My aim is to get everything to a golden brown color, and depending on how aggressive you set your stovetop, this can take anywhere between 10 and 30 minutes. The moment I feel that I have gotten the color I want, I take the pan off the heat and dump the flour into my sieve. I can then filter the flour by knocking on the sieve until all that remains are bits and clumps. Throw them away. These would have imparted a bitter and burnt flavor. I actually overshot things a little, and this particular color right here resulted in a stew with pronounced toasted flavors. I like it, but I am conscious that it might be polarizing. Now that this is done, I can pour the flour into a sealable Tupperware and set it aside. With the pot having spent the night in the fridge, I can move on to degreasing. Grease is good, but there is a limit to everything, and the dish itself is already heavy enough that putting a layer of fat on top is just plain overkill. It seems as if there is not much fat until I look at how much I collected on my plate. With that, here is what I need for the second part of the recipe proper. 2 pounds of ground pork. I did not pay attention to how lean it was, and I feel that any type of ground pork will work. A spice mix made of 1 teaspoon salt, 1 teaspoon ground cinnamon, 1/8 of a teaspoon ground pepper, 1/8 of a teaspoon ground clove, and 1 pinch of nutmeg. Why the first part of the recipe called for coarse salt and this one called for basic table salt is a mystery. I always have both kinds on hand, so I did not really fuss over that detail. 1 small onion, which I will chop as finely as I can until I run out of patience. Half a cup of breadcrumbs. I do not have breadcrumbs, but I do have panko, and that will work just as well. I will soak them into a dash of milk and give that a couple of minutes to absorb. This part is going to be therapeutic. I will mix all of that stuff together. Kitchen gloves are highly recommended, or else you will be wearing pork mittens in no time. I will knead and squeeze until everything is mixed together nicely. There we go. That looks homogeneous enough. Now to make meatballs. Make them big, make them small, make them however your heart desires. For reference, I have big hands and mine turned out to be on the large side and then some. I used only 1 plate to stack them, but in hindsight I strongly recommend using however many plates are needed to have the meatballs occupy only 1 layer and be just far enough apart that you can quickly and easily pick them up with tongs. This is a 12-inch cast iron pan. I cooked bacon and eggs earlier today, figuring I would recycle the bacon grease into cooking the meatballs. I made lunch, everything was great, and then I cleaned the pan. My plan B will consist of the grease I removed from the stock earlier. There is a bit of moisture on that stuff, so I am expecting the pan's contents to sputter all over the place and make a giant mess. You might want to consider using bacon or duck fat if you got that lying around. I will get the pan hot and then brown the meatballs on as many sides as I can. I will also reheat the stock, and all I need to do is drop the meatballs in there whenever they are ready. I will point out that the meatballs do not necessarily need to be fully cooked by the time they make it out of the pan. As predicted, the combination of grease and moisture makes for spectacular fountains, and that makes it a good opportunity to use my sadly undersized splash guard. Now the entire internet knows why my kitchen always looks like a war zone. I will replace the cooked meatballs with fresh ones in the pan as I go along and add more cooking fat whenever I feel it necessary. The meatballs will complete their process inside the pot, and I will set the timer for 1 hour, once again at a gentle simmer. While that is going on, I can prepare the side dish. Potatoes. Basic plain old russet potatoes. They will absorb the sauce very nicely. I think half the bag should be enough. It will give me enough to work with, and probably some extra for the rest of the week. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I am going to cook them just like pasta, swimming in a big pot of salted water. Now to get back to the flour. I had started with 1 cup and some change. I will add 1.5 times that in water, therefore a cup and a half. This will allow me to make a toasted flour paste. To mix it is where the magic of a sealable container comes in. I close her up and give it a good shake. Boom! Toasted flour paste in seconds. 1 hour later, I am ready to introduce the paste to the stew. Keep in mind that not all of the paste will go into it. The idea is to make the stew as thick as you desire, and everyone will have a different idea of where that point lies on the spectrum. In my case, I used nearly the entire helping. You might want to use less, or you might want to use even more, and to make that possible, you will toast maybe a cup and a half of flour instead of just 1 cup. Whatever works. I played it fast and loose on the first half, but I got more careful with the second half, incorporating thoroughly. Once I have the stew to the level I want, I add the pork shank meat from yesterday, stir everything together, and give it a few minutes to let the temperature even out. I did the potatoes at the same time, but nothing stops me from simply putting the readied stew aside and doing the potatoes standalone, during which I can give them my full focus. That said, the potatoes do not need to be pretty. Once they are done, I pull them out, throw in some ground pepper for taste, and I can portion out the dish. For reference, I ended up with 10 generous portions. The final result is a miracle worker on cold winter days, accompanied with potatoes that I can mash to take in all of that sauce. Because the amount of effort remains mostly the same no matter the quantity, making a double recipe is pretty easy and excellent for when you want enough for the family party and yet more for yourself for several weeks. With that, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and Bon Appetit!